Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into Otram's YouTube channel. Today we've got a 2010 Toyota Corolla in here that we're going to replace the radiator and ended up also replacing this coolant connector pipe because it just crumbled when we would take the radiator out. So let me move you around and we'll get started. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is drain the radiator. So I've got a short piece of just rubber hose and I'm going to fish it down here. And I'm going to feed it out the front of the core support over my drain bucket. And then I'm going to wiggle it on the bottom of the drain cock here. Come on. My hose is a little too small for this. Hopefully it'll work. There we go. We got that on there. And I'm going to peek underneath to make sure that I am above my drain bucket. And I am. I can go ahead and open up my drain valve. And I'm going to take my radiator cap off to relieve vacuum. And we'll let that drain for a bit. And with that, looking down the filler neck, I can see that I'm lower than this. So I can go ahead and pop my reservoir overflow hose off and just tuck it out of the way. And then it looks like I'm going to be able to take the whole radiator out with the fan shroud and fans on it. So I'm going to undo the transcooler lines here initially instead of at the radiator because they're going to be easier to get to up here. So I'm just going to take some needle nose pliers and slide their clamps back. And then I'm also going to take the steam vent pipe off here, just because it'll make it easier to swap everything over because it runs behind these two that are bolted on. And I'm just going to grab a pair of hose pliers. You can wiggle these loose without these. These just make it easier. That one wants to move easy. This one does not want to free up. This thing's got 15 years of just stuck. You know, be careful, you can see it's starting to shred the outside of that jacket, which is not what we want. There we go. Now we're starting to wiggle loose. And I'm going to put hose clamps on these lines to try to keep the spillage to a minimum when I pull them off. I'm going to spill some fluid, but try to keep it to a minimum. I'll tuck that up out of the way. Same with the other one. And then, yeah, I'm going to have a little bit of dribble coming from those. Now I'm just going to stick a piece of hose and double it over. And that is not what you want to do. I just bumped that and broke the nipple off. So we're going to have to get a new one of these couplers, which, looking at the staining here, this was already leaking. Awesome. So I'm going to order one of those up. But while I'm over here in the neighborhood, I'm going to go ahead and undo the electrical connector for the cooling fan and stick it out of my way. And then now that our radiator has finished draining, we can go ahead and close this valve. Okay, so while I was waiting for this new part to show up, I went ahead and took the battery out just to give me more room to work and because the mounting bolts for this pipe connector kind of on the edge of the battery. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these clamps off. And if you grab these just right, you can get them to lock open. But these are not going to cooperate, so I'm just going to slide it down. Trying not to block your view. So I've got my two clamps slid back. And then there's two bolts holding this to the battery tray. And this, while technically a side quest for changing the radiator, as weak as this fitting was, and the one on the other side, I would almost consider this mandatory when you're changing the radiator. This was a common enough failure that there were multiple versions of it in stock at our local parts store. Yeah, you can, I don't know if you can see, it was starting to get brittle and leak around the other edges too. So the replacement we got is actually aluminum, and you could get it in plastic too, but I kind of figure if we're going through the trouble of replacing it, might as well upgrade to the aluminum one. So we'll get that bolt started. If it'll start, there we go. And those I'm just going to lightly nip down because they are very small. Ah, I left my pliers right there on the top of the core support. And then I'm going to put this rear clamp back on. And, you know, I'm going to put the front one back on too. I'm going to take this loose of the radiator while the radiator's in here. And best practice would be to be replacing these rubber hoses and these clamps all at the same time. We're not. So I try to line the clamps back up with the imprints of where they were. It just seems to help give you a better odds of getting a good seal. And then I'm going to when I took the wire loose earlier, I neglected to take the clip out that's holding it to the fan shroud. So come in there, wiggle that guy out, and that way I can tuck that all the way out of my way. Do not forget to plug that back in. And then I can come down, and I don't think you're going to be able to see it on either of the cameras, but there's a radiator clamp down here holding the hose to the radiator. I'm going to back that off. And I'm going to pop this hose off and slide it out of the way. And then same thing, if you follow this hose down, you can see its clamp. I'm actually going to get another light. The lights I'm using so that you guys can see sometimes make it really hard for me to see. So I'm going to stick a second light down in here. And this one is not wanting to cooperate, just using needle nose. So I'm actually going to use my extendo hose clamp removers. And these, you just put the end on the clamp, squeeze them, it'll release the clamp. And then same thing, we can move it up, release that off of there. And then pull the hose off. And I initially was going to leave this bracket on the fan shroud until we had this out of the truck. But looking more closely, I'm going to have to take this whole plastic top plate off before I take the radiator out. Excuse me. So we're going to pop it out first. I'm going to just move these hoses back a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this hose out. And it also broke free at the other end. Luckily, our new aluminum, this guy, has a new hose with it. And I'm going to put this bolt in here to remind me where it came from. And then I can come over here to the core support and take these clamps off. And I don't know if they're side specific, so I'm going to set them here on the intake with the sides they go to. And with those mounting brackets off, we can rock the radiator back enough to take these two 10mm headed bolts off, put them off the side, and then you can wiggle this. Come on. And it's clipped on. There's a couple of clips coming across this face, but we can pull it forward and unclip it from the AC condenser. And then let's get a little pocket screwdriver and see which way. There we go, it clips in the back. And then we can unclip this whole bracket and set it off to the side. And then I'm hoping we can pull So in the instructions, it shows pulling the front bumper, pulling this whole core support. I'm trying to avoid that, so I'm going to see if I can pop this up out of that lower mount. I know I can get this side out. And it doesn't look like it's going to let me. So where this top support bolted on here, there's a matching one on the bottom that the AC condenser is also sitting in. And there's not enough room to pop the condenser up and get it out of that lower bracket so I can slide everything out. I don't think. So I may have to pop this core support loose. I'm hoping I can just pop it loose and not have to take it all the way out. And of course, there are bolts on the front face of it. This is a really stupid design, Toyota. Most other ones like this, you can get away with just squeaking them out. Doesn't doesn't look like that's the case on this one. So I'm going to take just these upper clips loose. And then these two bumpers. And that is a 2. This car is really rusty, crusty. So I'm trying not to take off any more than I have to. Like that one where that just stripped out. And that one. Awesome. So I'm just going to pop these rubber bumper caps off. And hopefully the bottom of this bumper is also held together with a lot of zip ties. So I really, really don't want to have to pull the bumper. But there we go. That'll give me enough room that I can sneak in here and get these front bolts off. Yeah, there we go. And there we go. We can slide this guy forward enough. Come on. This is a really stupid design. And there's also a wire down here that we're gonna have to disconnect. There we go. We've got the condenser now in front of everything. We just need to get everything that's in the way out of the way. There we go. And this is the bracket that was sticking under there and holding us up. And now you can see the condenser. It's got pins on the bottom that go into that bracket. And then you can see here's the hose that I had on the petcock to help me drain. I'm gonna take these 2 rubber bushings off the bottom because those are gonna give me access to the 2 10mm bolts that are holding the rest of the shroud on. Go. And then we've got the other end of our transcooler lines here. That are much easier to get to. Come on. There we go. Now that's all loose. I can set this off to the side. Get our new radiator out. Then I'm gonna loosely start that bolt. And the other one down here. And I'm gonna put my clamps back on before I forget. And that clamp is rotten toasty. So, I'm gonna find a new one for this side. Of course, now my hose doesn't want to come back off. Come on. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it or not, but the hose or the clamp is so crunchy that it just collapsed. I'm not a big fan of using the worm clamps, but sometimes that's just what you have to do. There we go, that guy's tight. And then I'm going to use an actual wrench to tighten these down because it is a brass insert going into a plastic tank. Excellent engineering there, Toyota. And we're also going to make sure that the drain valve is shut while we're here. And we'll put our 2 mounts back on. I'll move the camera back over and we'll put this back in. And then you just want to be Careful while you're fishing this back in that you're not mangling any of the fins or pinching any of your hoses under anything. Go. Now it's back in the hole. And I'll drop the radiator back down into the feet. And wiggle the condenser. There we go. And the condenser's back on its brackets now. Whew. Now we can slide the core support back over. Actually, before I do that, pop that back up out of the way. I'm going to put this upper bracket back on just so it's easier to fish. And I'll just hook it. It snaps in and our condenser pins are through. And then we'll take our bolts with the shoulders on them. And same thing, just going to lightly use a wrench to tighten these up. And then while I'm here, I'm going to put this hose back on. Actually, no, I'm not, because I'm going to feed the other pipe through first. Now I'm going to put this back in. And when you're putting your core support back in, you just want to line up the paint marks on the bolt heads to make sure everything goes back together right. And I did these in the wrong order. These shoulder ones are the bumper ones. That's what I get for not using two different drain buckets, or not drain buckets, bolt buckets. I didn't think those shouldered bolts looked quite right going in on the radiator. There we go. We can take our clamps. So you don't have to take the front bumper all the way off. It would likely be maybe easier to get everything snaked in and out if you did. But I don't know. I mean, it worked pretty well doing it this way. And then I'm going to take my plastic clips, put them back in their holes. And these two were the bumper screws stripped out. I'm gonna see if I can order new ones of these. So I'm gonna leave those out for now. And I'm gonna feed my lock support bolt back here in underneath. And hook my thermistor back up. There we go. And then I'm going to put my new hose on there. Feed it through its channels. Put my clips on. Move this guy up out of my way, and I can take my lower radiator hose. Actually, I don't know if that one's the upper or the lower. They're both about the same height on this. My radiator hose on this side. I'll stick that on. And then same thing, I'm going to come over here. Do that one. Get my light again down here so I can see what I'm doing. Go. And that looks like I'm on my grooves. So now I can take this blocker hose that I put on here and feed my transcoil lines back on. Take my clamps off. Put their clips back on. I really don't like the way those feel, so I'm going to check those for leaks real closely when we're done. And then I'm going to snap my fan wiring in and plug my fan in. And plug my overflow hose back on. Y'all are getting to see me struggle today. The Land Cruiser stuff we usually do repair videos on, you know, I've done 8 million times. This is the first time I've done a Corolla radiator. And I thought, oh, that'll be simple. I'll shoot a video on that. It won't be hard at all. Yeah, not so much. I'm going to just double check that I've got everything plugged in and clamped and bolted in. And I didn't have any leftover bolts in my bolt bucket, so that's always a good sign. Put my battery tray back in here. And my battery. Go, that's in there well. Put our positive on. Put our negative on. Okay. So now everything's back together. And the next thing I'm going to do is pressure test this. Let's see if I can do this without hitting the camera. Normally you would pump this up. We've got this cool adapter that goes to our air compressor. So we can just feed compressed air in here and slowly dial it up. And we'll stop right there. And then I will let this sit here a little bit and see if my gauge drops any. Sweet, we are holding. So I'm going to let that off. And this isn't absolutely necessary, but I always like to vacuum fill everything. It just makes it less likely that we get air pockets. So I've got a jug of Toyota Coolant down below. We'll let that pull in under vacuum. Okay, so now that we've run out of vacuum on there, I can open that up, take my vacuum filler off. And again, this step, not absolutely necessary, it just makes it easier. And then I'm gonna put my funnel adapter on here and put a burp funnel on. And what this is gonna do is, A, get the air pockets out that are still in there from vacuum filling, but it gives me a coolant source that's higher than the heater core. Normally your heater core is your highest point. So by putting this in here, we're getting a high point, and I'm gonna turn the engine on and turn the heat on and let the thermostat let the engine warm up till the thermostat opens and work the bubbles out. And then there's also a air bleed screw over here that I'm gonna open real quick just to make sure that there's nothing trapped in the top of the radiator. And the beauty of the burp funnel is it theoretically should get this trapped air also. But there we've got coolant coming out. And if you can't see this, it's right in front of the battery. It's a 6mm, I think it's 6mm. Yeah, 6mm hex plastic plug. Be very gentle with it because it's a plastic plug. And you just crack it open until coolant comes out. And it's a really nice day, so I can open up the door while I've got this running. I'm gonna give this one more double check to make sure I've got everything hooked up and that the fan spins freely, that I didn't drop anything in the fan hole. Now I'll fire this up and turn the heat on. And as you can see, we've got air bubbles working their way out. And even though the thermostat hasn't opened yet, and I'm going to look at my trans cooler fittings to make sure they're dry. And then it's also important, not only do we want this hot enough that the thermostat opens and we are really circulating, we also want to let it run long enough that we turn the radiator fan on, just to make sure that this is plugged in and it's still going to turn on, which actually it's on low speed right now. The AC must be turned on for defrost. So I'll let this hang out for a bit, warm up, and then I'll come back and finish up. And sometimes as it's warming up, if you squeeze the radiator hoses, you can jostle some air pockets out of them. And this is also not a necessary step, but I'm just going to go into the scan tool and watch the actual coolant temp to double check that I'm open and flowing and don't have any issues. And we're at 150 degrees, so we've got some ways to go yet. And I'm gonna put a throttle stick on this to increase my RPM to hopefully get this to warm up a little quicker. I raised it up to about 2,000 RPM. There we go, now our temperature's moving. And I turned defrost off, so hopefully we stop getting those idle surges. That hose is getting warm. This hose is not, so we have not opened our thermostat yet, which at 176, I wouldn't have expected it to. And there we're at 185, which, I don't know what, this one's 185 or 195. And that hose is still cold, so probably 195. Squeezing the hose also helps because sometimes you can get an air pocket stuck around the thermostat and the thermostat won't open, even though everything's getting hot. And while this is sitting here idling, warming up, I'm going to go ahead and check our trans fluid level because we did have the lines open. And this trans fluid's definitely due for a change, but it is full. I didn't think we lost much the way I capped the lines, but you know, you never know. You always want to double check. But we're good. I just wish this thing would decide to warm up. Out of the system. We're hovering at 190 now, so hopefully that'll get us up enough to open this, because yeah, our lower hose is still cold. Oh, there we go, 192. So we'll let that climb for a bit, see what it does. Hey, we're starting to get warm on the lower hose now. And I'm going to cut out a lot of this standing here and waiting time. But for those of you watching the recording, this has been warming up for probably 45 minutes at this point. So it's taking quite a while. And I put the throttle stick back on it. So I've got the throttle on at about 2,000 RPM, and I've got the heat off to try to get this thing to finish heating up. And there we go. Thermostat's opening because we're starting to get little bubbles through. And there we go. Yeah, we're at 199. Yeah, my lower hose is hot, so my thermostat's open. Here we go, 203. Almost 205. Now, and I didn't even hear the fans turn on, but we went up to 205, fans turned on, and now we're going down like 203, 201. So we know that's functional. So I'm gonna go turn heat on to get some of this flowing through the heater core to make sure there's no bubbles in there. And now we're back down to idle. We're hanging out at like 203. My heat's on. We got air bubbles coming through. Fan is off. So I'm gonna let this sit here and run until I'm not getting any more bubbles out of here. And then I will, shut the car off and I will let it, completely cool overnight. Because as it cools and the coolant, not shrinks, but as the coolant cools and contracts, it's gonna pull this back down and find its equilibrium. And then once it's dead cold, I will fill up the overflow bottle, and this will be all done, except for putting the 2 little bumper tabs back in. But yeah, that's changing the radiator on a 2010 Toyota Corolla. Hopefully you found that useful. If you did, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel and making more of these videos, please consider checking out our members page. It gives you early access to videos before they go live to the general public, and it helps me out because camera gear is not cheap. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you guys next time.